Hey everybody, we're gonna get started in just a couple minutes. Just hit 11, so I'll give just a minute for people to join us, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think now might be a good time to get started, introduce everybody. I'm Julie, I'm with Peakon. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're gonna get started in just a few minutes, and we'll be talking about turning employee feedback into action. So as you're getting settled, we'd love to get the conversation started. One of the ways we'll be interacting today is using the chat feature in Zoom. And throughout the next hour, we'll be asking you to go back to that chat and have a conversation with us. So if you're looking for it, just hover over your Zoom window and you'll find it on the lower right. So for starters, let's practice using that chat window. We'd love to know about you. What's your name and where are you dialing in from? You can type that in the chat window to the right. Hey, Ted. Hey, Katie, Lisa, Fatima. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got people from all over the world. This is really exciting. And so why are we here today? For anyone who is willing to share, after you've told us who you are and where you're coming in from, let us know, how is feedback seen at your organization? As in the culture itself, how does it feel? How do people feel about giving feedback, taking feedback, sharing it? Let us know in the chat. Got a few different answers. We got some people who seem suspicious about feedback, others who see it very positively. So it's pretty cool to see a lot of different ways people are building a culture of feedback at their organizations. So whether you shared or not, I think we all can agree that it's what you do after collecting the feedback that is even more important than gathering the feedback itself, which is why we're here today. So before we dive into that discussion about turning feedback into action, I wanted to introduce the co-hosts here today. First, I'm with Peakon, and Peakon is an employee engagement and people analytics platform that automatically collects employee feedback, analyzes it, and delivers you the insights you need to improve your business in real time. We also believe that empowered managers are key to successful engagement strategy, so we provide the tools, learning, and resources to help people leaders make the best decisions within their teams. And on the line today as well is our partner at ThinkHuman, and ThinkHuman is a leadership development and manager training company that drives lasting change and habit formation in companies like SoulCycle, Spotify, and Snapchat. And we're about to hand over and get started on this webinar, and you'll see that it's Meredith, the CEO at ThinkHuman, will be leading our discussion on what comes after the employee survey with our amazing panelists. So if you're still in the chat, once more, could you please open up your chat and let us know what your biggest challenge in actioning employee feedback is? That would be awesome. We'll be addressing that during our Q&A at the end of the session. So I'm gonna mute myself, stop my video, and let Meredith get started.
Right, awesome. Hello, everybody. We are so happy to have you here today in this conversation. And as Julie said, please submit your questions and get involved in this conversation in the chat. This is not television. And over the next better part of an hour, we have this awesome panel of experts that are going to be sharing their experience about responding to employee feedback in a way that elevates people's commitment and moves the company forward in meaningful ways, and they're taking your questions. So, as a starting point for context, more than ever, organizations are at work on building a feedback culture to be able to learn quickly, adapt, and elevate performance. Businesses are talking about feedback culture all the time. It's in company meetings. People are getting trained in how to give and receive feedback. Companies are investing in systems, and all for good reason, because when feedback dialogue is done well, we deepen alignment and our ability to do our best work together. And when it's done well, it can help us bring those blind spots that are hidden from our view into clarity so that we can learn and then put that learning to work and actually do better. But that said, it's not easy to embed this kind of positive learning culture from feedback in a whole organization. It requires modeling from how at the organizational level that we ask for and make sense of feedback and then put that learning into action, and how people leaders at every level of the organization demonstrate the same thing. And when we don't do it well, not only do we undermine that learning that we're talking about, but we all know it has a real impact on people's commitment. There are plenty of resources available out there about how to give feedback, how to ask for constructive feedback, but actually relatively little guidance on how to navigate the feedback that we receive. So how do we do this well in a way that elevates commitment and the organization overall? Brings us back to your questions and these awesome panelists here. We have Matt Hoffman. You guys, you can wave when I introduce you. Matt Hoffman, the New York City lead for People Tech Partners, which is an advisory and investment group. And Matt's also the former VP of DigitalOcean. Then we have LaToya Lin, Senior HR Business Partner at Compass, a hyper-growth real estate tech company with over 2,000 employees. We have Katie Zamora, Director of Employee Engagement from Luxottica, an eyewear company with over 10,000 employees. And we have Kristen Kaighn, Director of Customer Success from our partner at Peakon, also a fast growth company that's just under 5 years old. So let's get into this. We have a question that came in from Mara. Oh, by the way, you can put questions, just so you know, some questions are coming in from the Q&A box. You can also put questions straight into the chat. So we have a question from Mara saying, feedback you receive can sometimes just scratch the surface of an issue. So how can you be sure that you're addressing the actual problem, and how do we interpret contradictory feedback? So let's start with you, Kristen, and then let's hear from everybody on that question.
I mean, I think a lot of it starts from when you're building and asking for feedback, starting them with this culture of transparency, and the way that you can actually live that off the back of getting feedback responses is just asking for clarification, starting to give people, you know, not only the safe space to, as a vehicle, to share their feedback, but it's really important that you actually start to live that off of the digital, you know, out of the digital realm, and start having those open lines of communication. If you don't understand something or you don't understand where it's coming from, asking and being able to have face-to-face conversations. And then, you know, understanding when it comes to contradictory feedback is that people experience things very differently. We all have, you know, our own truth and kind of the way that we take things in. So again, seeking to understand, you know, why does somebody interpret something the way that they do, and not coming from a place of kind of judging to say, well, that's wrong, and it's blanket, it's not what we're doing at all, but getting to the root of why does that person think that, like, and what can we do to clarify it.
Awesome. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll start. You know, I think the best way to make sure that you're kind of getting the right feedback you want is actually feedback, the feedback that you heard to the people who gave it to them, and check with them and say, here's what I heard, here's what I took from it, here's what I think you told me. Is that right? Help me clarify, right? So that helps you understand that you're doing it on the same level. And, you know, like Kristen said, like, it's pretty normal for a large, diverse group of people to have a variety of experiences, even to the same kind of organizational stuff, right? And that's good because people are different, and you should recognize that and you should appreciate that. But having and recognizing that level of kind of diversity in the feedback enables you to make sure that you're giving the type of responses and the type of action that hits people in relevant ways to kind of who they are and where they are. So it's totally fine. It's totally normal that you would expect that. And that actually enables you to really make sure that you're understanding what people want. You know, it's so easy for leaders to kind of cherry pick the feedback that fits with their kind of predetermined narrative and kind of avoid the difficult feedback. But recognizing that not everyone's going to say the thing and giving different types of responses or different type of actions is actually a really healthy way of supporting an organization of diverse humans.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'll jump in here too. I think a couple of points that Matt and Kristen made are really important, because I think a lot of it is when you give feedback, ensuring that we're supporting managers to be able to receive that feedback in a way that then they can have the right dialogue and the right conversation. Because whether or not you agree with the feedback, whether or not you think the feedback may be right or wrong, it's reality to that person. I think that's a little bit what Kristen was touching on. That is their reality, and for them, that is the truth. So being able to both navigate through that feedback and help that person ensure that they feel heard, but at the same time being able to action it in a way that makes sense. I think manager support and manager development is such a critical component to any feedback, because if we're not supporting managers to be able to take the feedback, understand it, validate it, continue to ask for it, not just when an annual survey comes out, maybe just throughout the year, and seeing the value in that, it's going to be making it a much harder uphill battle for the organization.
All right, so LaToya, I want to give like a refined version of this question to you, but building off of it. So got it that a diverse experience is expected and good, and it may not fit with our predetermined narrative, but useful for us to understand that there should be a diverse set of experiences, and that we can and should ask for clarification and open lines of communication. But Laura is asking, building on that, how do we get to the root cause of the feedback? So once we feel like we understand the diverse feedback a little better, thoughts on how to dig for root cause?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think the biggest thing is for, if you get some feedback, like what is it all about? Is it behaviors? Like, what is it that I'm doing or saying, or just kind of internalizing it a little bit? It's really an opportunity to ask yourself clarifying questions around, like, is this something that I've always heard throughout my career, personally and professionally? Is this something that I, have a tendency to do? Is this something that I avoid and why I keep getting this feedback? And also asking questions around, expectations, right? That helps you understand where the root of it is. And I've said this before, I mean, the biggest thing is, like, anytime you do get feedback, I mean, those are the cycles of your future. Like, you're always going to know how you're, moving forward in your career and in your life when you get that. So I definitely think that the best way to find root causes is asking, more clarifying questions to yourself, and then asking more clarifying questions to the people that you're receiving to the feedback, and then connecting to the outcomes that you want to do in your career or your business. And I just saw something here, like, feedback is a very emotional experience, right? You have to feel safe. You have to feel like, not take it personally. Like, I am super emotional sometimes, but, at times I need to kind of say, let me separate my emotions from that and let me really think through, like, what are they trying to say to me? Is it they're trying to build a better connection and I need to think through that? Like, so there's several ways that, I've expressed here where you can really figure out the root cause of feedback.
All right, so I think you all thematically are saying going off of surface feedback is really insufficient, and you have to say back what you understand and then dig for more of the nuance and clarity, asking yourself and them questions. And you bring up the emotional reaction. I'm seeing it's talked about in the chat. And Stephanie is asking, as it relates to getting past the defensiveness and our own emotional reaction, how do we embed growth mindset in the processes of the organization so that people feel like they have the psychological safety to be vulnerable and the challenge and support and accountability to grow? So how do you put that kind of fail forward notion into practice in the structures and processes in your organization? Thoughts on that from any of you?
I can jump in. I would say it's a couple of things. So first of all, it really needs to be leadership buy-in at the top. So I think for folks to be able to feel confident in the giving and receiving of feedback, and the idea of you will receive feedback that, I think perfectly to LaToya's point, is possibly it's sometimes not going to feel great, but to be able to see that feedback as a gift and something that enables you to grow and develop yourself. That needs to start with an organizational culture of that confidence at the top. So if you see senior leadership at the top of the house exhibiting that vulnerability, that honesty, that enables managers and associates then to also feel that same level of confidence. If you don't see it at the top necessarily, I think it's much harder when you start to get down to the manager and the associate level to feel like you're in a safe space. That you have the ability to learn from and fail and be able to grow.
I think that's right. You know, there's an order to it, right? You can't create a psychologically safe environment by getting feedback, right? If you don't have that type of environment already in place, and all the way that Katie was saying, all the way that Meredith was saying, that the feedback is not going to be effective. People are going to be afraid to give you honest feedback. You're not going to get the level of growth. You're not going to get the development. So organizations think, you know, when they're trying to get better and they're trying to develop themselves, well, we'll just do a survey and that'll help us get better. And that's actually not the case, right? That's actually in some ways the easier part. The hard part is creating the type of environment where people are comfortable giving you feedback, right? Where people are comfortable giving you direct feedback, and that takes some work. And that's why companies hire people like ThinkHuman and groups like that, because it's really, really hard to do. And there's no quick way of doing it. But if you can create the space, and if your leaders and your managers can role model it exactly the way that Katie was talking about, it actually makes the feedback so much more effective. And conversely, if you're not doing that, the feedback's gonna be really hard to kind of really understand what's going on.
I want to add to Matt's point. Sorry, I just wanted to.
No, go ahead, LaToya.
Go ahead. I just really want to quickly add to Matt's point. I've seen, like, from a practical standpoint, I've seen like managers do a shift when I say, how do you want this person to feel after you tell them this information, right? And, you know, do you want them to be like stunned, scared, happy? Like, what do you want them to feel and connected to an emotion? And that's also helping them develop their emotional intelligence. And then, you know, I just see like oh, I want them to feel like this or that, you know? And then we start narrating our feedback towards that, right? So it's kind of like connecting to the emotional outcome that you want your person the receiver to hear and feel, for you then to be able to have it be more effective, if that makes sense. Sorry, Kristen.
It does, Kristen.
Yeah, I mean, I think not to de-emphasize the emotional reaction that managers can actually have to feedback, but there's a balancing of understanding the feedback that is directly, you know, kind of related to them and the relationship with their employees. But then there's the feedback that's the sum of the employee's experience across everything with the company. So if you think about correlating to your employee or your customer experience with NPS, that's the sum of how they're interacting with your product, with customer service, with support. It's not all on, you know, the actual individual manager. So on helping them with, you know, that psychological safety is how are you empowering them to communicate on the things that are not in their scope and their realm of control. So giving them the confidence, and that's all about the cascade of information from the top and how leaders and managers are getting these kind of talking points of the way that they support their employees so that they're comfortable, they're confident, and they're able to talk through the things that they don't necessarily control. But helping them understand that there are things that they, yes, obviously, like their performance and they need to work on, but a feedback result is not their personal score. And there is a little bit of compartmentalizing of your score as a human also is not a survey response.
It's really, really useful, all of you. So I hear One part of this is modeling from the senior most leadership about how organization-wide feedback is shared and action is taken, and training for leaders at all levels, so that whether it's the executives talking about company or org-wide feedback, or frontline managers talking about feedback from their team, that there is that psychological safety for people to feel like that is wanted, that the feedback that was given was wanted, and that it's put into action. And then also, Kristen, I heard you add giving a framework for what and how to communicate, so people feel like they have a little bit of backstop and they're not just left to their own devices. I want to ask another question about growth mindset before we move off of this, which is, what are the systematic ways that growth mindset can get embedded in things like how you do 360s, or how you use the surveys, or performance reviews, any other ways that you think growth mindset is either getting reinforced or undermined? And Matt, I want to direct this question to you, because you had said something about using surveys when they are used in a penal way. So
yeah, that's a big part of it, and that's also part of kind of the culture and the kind of the environment that you're trying to take around an organization. If you're using an engagement survey tool or a feedback tool as like a scorecard, right? Where if you get this level of number, great, you get a big bonus. And if you get this level of number, we're gonna have a conversation about whether you're the right leader for the organization. That's gonna be pretty antithetical to creating a growth mindset, right? So creating that safe space where feedback is really seen as kind of this developmental gift, this developmental tool, means that regardless of kind of what it ends up showing, it's an opportunity to use that to get better. And lots of organizations, you know, under the guise of accountability, will say, well, we want our leaders to be this, and there are companies that tie compensation to engagement scores and things like that. And it comes with the best of intent, of course, because you want to create that level of accountability. And I understand where that's coming from, but it actually creates a real danger that there's going to be implicit or even explicit pressure on leaders to get their employees to respond a certain way. And so you're not going to get that honest feedback. And so really using it as a developmental tool and making sure that message is heard really clearly goes a long way to creating that growth mindset, as opposed to kind of this scorecard mentality where it's up or out.
Awesome, thank you. Question from Jessica, a participant, is about trust in the company. And with a large company, how do you make everyone feel like their voices were heard, even when the suggestions were not all acted upon? So Katie, do you want to take a first crack at that?
Yeah, so I think that is a very challenging component, because when it comes to feedback, and I've seen a lot of it in the chat, a lot of folks feel hesitant to share it. They feel concerned about their anonymity. They worry about maybe it won't be actioned. So then you share your feedback and you see action beginning to happen, and you feel as though maybe that doesn't represent what you shared. So maybe that makes you hesitant to share feedback again in the future. So I think there's a couple of things that are really, really important. One, depending on the type of feedback that's being shared, making sure that everyone is brought into the conversation. So if it's larger, maybe engagement survey type of feedback, ensuring that you're bringing everyone into those discussions in smaller groups. So you're giving folks an opportunity to be a part of the go forward. How are things maybe going to improve, or how are we going to sustain the things that are going very well? I think it's really important that everyone thinks about engagement, thinks about sharing feedback as an accountability on both sides, right? So you don't want it to be just, I share this feedback with you, and now you go and go fix, or go make sure that you continue to do whatever it is. That it's an accountability on both ends, and you really need to be working all together for a common goal for it to really be successful. So I think when you are in an organization where maybe it's a larger type of a survey feedback, and you've got folks who may not feel as though what they shared is being actioned, it's really important to have them be a part of conversations and a part of the go forward, so that they feel as though they're valued. I think that's a really important component.
Yeah, that seems to keep it coming up thematically in this conversation, is that one-time communication, like here is my employee feedback, is really like it falls flat. And I keep hearing you all reiterate that it's an ongoing dialogue, that it needs to happen multi-channel, it needs to happen in different ways, that people feel like they are heard and can interact, and different people can communicate in different ways. So that they both feel like their communication was landed and that they got to participate in the process. Let's talk about executive involvement. Oh yeah.
So no, I mean, yeah, just kind of like a final thought on that. I mean, there's distribution of like the ownership of how people's, you know, voices are heard. Like there's, you know, what you can communicate at the executive level or at the macro level from an organization, the things that you're talking about in your all hands meetings, what you're going to prioritize that are aligned to your strategic objectives. But then you're also having like your individual one-on-one conversations. And if the manager, so it's top, you know, top down, top up, and ultimately like that trickle up will happen to your overall cultural, you know, organization kind of feedback. But if managers can have like those, you know, those small incremental conversations where maybe there's not a big program or global launch initiative that's happening around it, but if I'm having those small conversations with you, then ultimately that's going to extrapolate.
And when you say I'm having the small conversations with you, are you talking about people ops or talking about managers?
No, I actually put myself in the role of the manager right there, and how, you know, I thought about a conversation I had with one of my team members this morning. It was popping up for me that workload was like cropping up as an issue with my team. And there's just, you know, sometimes there's just not really anything you can do in the moment, but I was having a one-on-one, wanted to use that as a, you know, what is happening and kind of finding out like what's going on with the workload. What can we do? What are the blockers? So sorry, I put myself there in the manager seat for a second. But that was something that like, I know I can take that small conversation. And if every leader in the company is having those small incremental conversations, ultimately that will roll up.
Yeah, I really love that the communication about the survey is not the responsibility just of people ops or just of the executive or whatever feedback was translated, but that it cascades down to the level of each person's manager, and that somehow managers are getting equipped by the organization to not just talk about their own feedback about them as a manager, but also the organization-wide feedback, and that they have, whether it's clear communication about what the feedback was, what talking points, so they feel like they have scaffolding behind them, but that they're not ill-equipped and wobbly in navigating those conversations with their directs. Anything anybody wants to add about that? No, all right, then we're going to talk about executive involvement. Bob is asking, how do you convince your leaders that ongoing feedback or continuous listening is necessary and beneficial to build engaged teams, especially when they think they've heard what people have to say? So Matt, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a former colleague a few days ago who was just about to kind of launch their big engagement survey, and we're talking about all the questions that she was doing in some design, and I was asking, well, what are you going to do with the survey? How are you going to communicate kind of the action planning and the feedback? And she's like, no, the leader doesn't want to focus on that. They're going to let the execs kind of do what they want with it. You know, and I smiled and I said, you know, no judgment, but that's about the worst idea that I've ever heard. But no judgment, right? Not to be too judgy. And it's true, because the whole idea is that this is a tool to help you get better. The feedback and the survey is not the end of the process. It's the very beginning, in the same way that I can't imagine a company would think that it's normal or okay to go out and, you know, ask customer for feedback or ask our sales reps for feedback and then not do anything with it. Like, you have the opportunity to actually make the organization better. So helping the leaders understand that, like, this is something for you to help make your organization run better, to help get your employees more connected to the mission, to the vision, to understand what's driving them, to help drive retention, to help create a better employment brand. It is a tool for them to get better. And that generally resonates, but the idea that you would do the survey without actually kind of committing to doing things to getting better in a very kind of transparent and visible way kind of negates the whole point of the survey. And these are such amazing ways, especially in large organizations where leaders don't have that direct visibility to everything that's going on, to actually see what's going on for the people who are working for them. And so it really is a conversation about helping them understand this is something you help them be more effective leaders.
Yeah, that's great points, Matt. I mean, if I can add to that, in my past experiences working with executives, you know, I think the tricky part here for HR leaders is that we have to market it towards them, right? We have to kind of make it worth their while. Although, you know, like, why do we feel like we have to do that? This is their company, but it's really bringing them to your attention. So what I used to do, or would do, is I would say, here are things that you would never know, right? You know, because, and I remind the executives, like, most times you're in a room full of people that are trying to please you and tell you all the right answers all the time. Here is the only opportunity in your life with your employees that you actually get what's actually going down, like the real tea of what's happening in your business. And, you know, when I market it that way, they go, oh, and I said, I'll start here. Here are things that you know, like, you already know this, so we'll spend less time on that. Here are the things that you don't know, right? How people are feeling about their managers, how people are feeling about the work that they do, right? So you're pushing this vision, and it's most important to you and to the board and everyone to, you know, create results and drive revenue. But people actually don't really like this. So we have people that are most likely, you know, not engaged, and here's why. So I think it's just really, you know, as HR professionals, we have to kind of not twist it, but like really like market it in a way where this is the only time you're going to get real feedback, you know, about what's actually happening, because people are either too afraid to talk to you directly, and it's not because of you personally, it's just like your role. So here is a you know, tool to help you kind of get the real deal of your business.
And then also showing them the utility, like giving them like a real life, like practical example of, this is your business model, this is your structure, here's something that came in, and like, here's the utility of how those things connect to each other. Like, put it in real life terms for them. Mm-hmm. It's not this like esoteric kind of, you know, like fluffy stuff. Like, there really is gold nuggets in the feedback that they can use.
Right. So instead of just trying to convince them to care, creating the need for them, so there's like a demand or a desire on their part to use this, get this, so they can get better and find out what they don't know. All right, cool. We have some questions in the chat. We've got Tracy asking, in the Q&A, Tracy asking, how can you help others to see the positive feedback through the negative? I often see this as a limiter to use the power of the feedback. So any of you want to jump on that question from Tracy? Seeing the positive through the negative. I'm gonna pick one of you if you don't jump in.
I think that's where like a good like HR partner or a good people partner can help, right? Especially when, you know, you're kind of separate the quantitative from the qualitative. It's kind of human nature to kind of just zero in on like the one negative thing, and it creates a lot of anxiety, and it's kind of normal to do that. But you know, a good leader will sit down with their managers and their execs and be like, here's actually what the data says, and here's the overall trends, and kind of recognize and validate that there is going to be some anxiety about some of the negative stuff, but really have a conversation around, here's all the positive things that people appreciate about you as a leader and where the business is going, and here's how the negative stuff or some of the development stuff can help kind of, you know, soften some of the edges or rough some of the edges, and how we can actually use that to kind of create a better narrative.
It's funny because it actually is a little bit of, I think to Matt's point, it's sharing the feedback of the feedback, right? Like, you're sharing with people how, you know, what the feedback was, what was shared. And then that, as a manager, back to kind of making sure that you're helping to support and develop managers by sharing both the positive and really helping them to be aware of the positive, to celebrate the positive. Helps also the conversation with the more opportunistic feedback. Here are areas that we can work to, right? Here are areas that we can work to improve, but let's celebrate the things we're doing really well. And let's talk about this broadly, the things we're doing well, because if we take our eye off of the things we're doing well to focus on the things not going well, those things are going to probably come down. So it's interesting. It's almost like that second level of feedback sharing. It will enable managers to then feel supported and empowered by their maybe higher level leader to receive both positive and negative feedback. And it's not penalizing them, but it's empowering them to hear it.
Great. So on one side, we've got positive, and then on the other, we've got constructive. And Suzanne is asking, what are some approaches to help managers respond to challenging, difficult feedback and navigate their own defensiveness? So LaToya, I'm going to send this one to you first.
Sure. Great question, Stan. Thank you. I think the biggest thing is really helping the manager understand that great people always get feedback. And top managers and top leaders always get feedback, kind of like helping them with their ego a little bit. And because it's a natural thing to feel like, oh, and I think, really just realigning them to like, congratulations, you've gotten a gift, to be able to unpack, things that you haven't been focusing on, and you've over-indexed it on this, and now you can work on this to make you that whole person that you want to be. And it really comes down to, and I think Matt said this earlier, it comes down to a really good HR business partner or a good manager to help people like relate it back to them in a very safe way. So just step by step, if we're looking at an HR leader to a manager standpoint, HR leader can go in, understand the feedback, and then help them synthesize it in a way where it is making them a whole person, right? These are your blind spots. This is going to help you become great. Let's focus on these areas, and you tell me what you see and how you can improve, kind of putting it back on them to kind of be self-reflective. That's very helpful. And then let them share what's difficult to them, right? Why is this difficult? And then you ask questions. Why is it difficult to you? Kind of a coaching methodology. And that typically, where I've seen that be very successful. I've had experience where I've seen a manager kind of go like this. And I'm like, why are you physically going like this? And he's like, I don't know why I have that reaction. I think I'm just stressed or whatever. And then it really helps them unpack everything. So again, we don't want to always be in a position where we're giving people only good news. We want to give them news to make them better. And I think that's the best way to frame something like that.
I think that's exactly right. Some of this stuff is hard, right? And that's why human resources are so highly compensated, because this stuff is difficult. But at the end of the day, I think LaToya said it well. Like, it's not our job to make leaders better. It's our job to help them become better and to give them the tools and the coaching and support. And if you're not open to feedback and you're not open to getting better, like, you may not be the right person to be a people manager. And there's probably lots of great roles for you to do, but our job is to help them understand that and to give them the coaching and data through these things.
Yeah, that panic reaction or threat response, it's so fundamentally human. We're like wired up to have that amygdala threat. Oh my gosh, I need to make myself look good or avoid looking bad. So having some of the big themes I hear from what you're saying is the coaching from the HR business partner or manager or whoever is available to help someone synthesize the feedback, take it in a balanced way that leaves them a whole person and not try to focus on everything that they heard. Nobody can take on all the areas, but let them choose what are the key areas they're going to go to work on. And even maybe setting that framework, not just one-on-one through HR business partner, but like a framework or playbook for here's how you as a manager can start to digest and internalize feedback, and maybe even manage your expectations for it is our expectation that you will dig for the gold so that you can grow versus defend yourself. I'd like to know what you all think about having a manager expectation about how people receive and put feedback to work. Thoughts on that?
I think it's really important to set an accountability, I think is probably a better way to look at it. I love the way LaToya framed the support to managers is so critical, how as HR leaders, as HR business partners, we need to know the leader and the manager and their business to be able to give that feedback in a way that that person will hear it, and so that it feels as though it's a partnership and it's a coaching. But I think what's really interesting, and one of the points I think that we kind of have been talking a little bit about, is also the idea of a natural reaction. So also letting people have a natural reaction that, some people a natural reaction will be to kind of take off all the reasons why that feedback's wrong. Well, I didn't do that, or that's not what I meant with that. And kind of helping them to see that, back to I think we talked about in the beginning, right, wrong, or indifferent, the feedback that is being shared is that person's reality. So helping those leaders to be able to accept the feedback as it is, and then how are they going to be able to move that forward, I think is really important. But I think it's important that as an organization, there's a culture of accountability around it. I think Matt made a really great point about the importance of not making it something that goes into, you have to achieve X, Y, and Z, because then it almost has the adverse effect. But I think that accountability, where they see at the top, leaders taking ownership of feedback, being honest and transparent about the feedback that they received and that they're working on, that trickles down through an organization.
I love that. So, oh yeah, go ahead, Kristen, please.
So it kind of like what I'm hearing, like you have your leadership, your manager, your HR like support systems, and this might seem a little bit scary to some people and like something that could potentially backfire, but also having the peer coaching and the peer relationships for people to have manager communities and come together and talk about not necessarily specific results, but maybe some big themes and some big kind of drivers of engagement and things that they want to have discussion around and learn from other leaders on. As HR, ops and HR business partners, we can see all of that, and we can kind of see, who is really, really strong in one area and who actually struggles, and to not do, such an obvious pairing, but help those people learn from each other. That's kind of another support network and system that you can give to them, to like, you're not in this alone. And then it also reinforces that this is an organizational wide thing. It's not an individual, and it's not it's not a global executive ownership.
Kristen, I'd love to jump in there because I completely agree. I think a community of practice type of setting and being able to support managers and leaders in both one-on-one supported feedback, but then also working with one another. In my experience, it's been incredibly helpful actually getting managers together. And again, maybe not getting into detailed specifics, but it's very likely that one manager is doing something really well that another manager could learn from, and vice versa. But you have to really create that culture of a safe space within the manager community to be able to have managers feel confident in being vulnerable and saying, yeah, actually, like, I'm not doing very well in this area. And does anyone have any suggestions? And maybe you're bringing things from a different, organization you've come from, or from a past life, something that you've done that's really working well. Encouraging that community of practice and peer coaching, I've seen to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quickly what Kristen said too, and Katie, I feel like you sum it up great. I think I just thought of like analogy of like, and I'm reading some of the chats here. Some people, have small companies. They don't have HR business partners. They don't have HR teams to be able to help them. And, and managers could be too, high up the food chain to really give them that type of attention. So I thought of like maybe, and hopefully some people can find this helpful, is like, everyone has like that best friend or that girlfriend or whomever that always tells you that you may look too fat in that dress, or you shouldn't wear that lipstick color, or your hair shouldn't look like this, or whatever the case may be in your personal life. Like where is that friend that everyone can find that doesn't have the HR team, can be that same person for you? I mean, obviously they won't talk about those things because it's not legal and practical, but they can talk to you about like, ooh, maybe you were a little bit too much in that meeting, or maybe the email that you sent out to the company didn't really sound like. Find an accountability buddy is what I'm summarizing here. If you don't have that large HR team or whatever the case may be, and find them and then and build like that one-on-one trust and connection where that you can respect their opinion and vice versa. So you can have these safe dialogues to be able to become better, and they can constantly give you feedback on a regular basis and then build that community throughout the organization.
What I really appreciate about where the conversation has gone is that it's one thing to digest and internalize feedback and find what's important to go to work on, and then another to actually create change, either as an organization or as an individual. And it's just not easy to create change. Behavior is just so embedded and habitual, whether it's our own individual behavior or collective organizational behavior, and that pairing of support and accountability. So it's a safe space to try things and fail, and to feel like we have, that we're not in it alone, and we have a peer group, but also paired with honest ownership and accountability for the thing that we are trying to change and the impact that it's having, and some kind of accountability structure, whether it's accountability buddies like you're saying, LaToya, or other accountability structures to pull through that change rather than just leave it sitting. Matt, did you want to say something?
Yeah, what you both reminded me of, there's this kind of famous kind of management trope saying, I don't like people who come with me with problems, I like people who come to me with solutions, right? And that sounds right, but it actually can create a lot of conditions that make it hard to get feedback, right? Because if you're going to dismiss someone every time they give you feedback, if they don't have a solution, you're actually going to make it much harder for people to point out issues and things can get better. And sometimes people don't know what the solutions is, but you should appreciate the fact that they pointed out that you didn't show up in the way that you wanted, that your organization is not doing it that way. And maybe if you create that open space to do that, you guys can figure it out together, right? And that creates that space for having those difficult conversations around getting it better. So just expecting people to always come with the solution rather than saying, hey, here's what I've noticed and here's what I can get better, is actually a really bad practice in reality around creating the opportunity to use feedback to make things better.
Matt, that's so useful. I was just thinking how incredibly helpful that was for me as a receiver of feedback, not to just be looking for the solution in what they're saying, and really to be vulnerable and open enough to hunt for really digesting the problem, even if the solution is unclear. And then Ariana and Sandra both in the chat are saying, yes, so true. So yes, I think there's some collective appreciation of the challenge that it is to hear constructive feedback without a solution and to be able to make meaning and use of it. We have Donna asking about managing action. And she's asking, what have you found works most effectively to ensure follow through on action? So whether it's at the organizational level, let's start with the organizational level. Katie, what have you found works about to ensure follow through on action?
I think it comes back to so much of what we've already been talking about. It's the accountability. It's having leadership buy-in at the very top and from the beginning that this is something that's important, because if you hear from the top and from leadership, transparency around feedback, transparency around the areas of both opportunity and strength within an organization and how they're being worked on, it will make that much easier when you think about the next steps into action planning and into follow through. So I think it really starts with seeing that at the top, then gives managers that support, accountability, really to then focus on that themselves. Because you think about, what we're talking about is such a critical part of managing a team, managing an organization, but there's also this entire big part of their business that's the business. And a lot of times, for a variety of reasons, that's gonna come to the forefront. And so really making sure that that leadership buy-in at the top is saying, yes, of course, we're running a business and we need to be focused on this, but we can't lose sight of feedback and we can't lose sight of action planning, because if we lose sight of that, the trickle-down effects of what that will become will be disillusionment from our associates, disengagement, lack of trust, the things that will start to break down with us overall as an organization will then impact our business.
Kristen, anything you want to add in terms of how to create, to jump onto what Katie is saying, the leaders at the top have to show from an organization-wide level ongoing engagement with making action come to life. But that's not always easy because business demands pull the attention of executives, and what was a priority 3 weeks ago when we shared the engagement results can become less of a priority in the face of business demands. So other thoughts on how to keep executive engagement with making the new action, which change is hard, making new action happen?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think that's a really meaty one. I think we talked about it a little bit in terms of like dialogue and making sure that they're understanding what they've been hearing, what employees are saying, and that they're kind of connecting it back to the business model and what's happening, to the kind of continuous nature of what's happening in your business, where if you're just getting feedback on an annual basis, quarterly basis, then you've already evolved and your people have already moved on from like what was happening in that moment, and now they're dealing with a whole kind of fresh set of challenges. So I think getting them in that like that continuous mindset of how they're supporting this, how they're digesting it, internalizing it, communicating on it, and then also kind of communicating around their own actions that they're taking. Which I think all of that's kind of easier said than done, but we've kind of talked about it already of, you know, how do you keep them involved in the process?
Great. So, somebody wanted to jump in. Go for it.
Yeah, I think to build on Kristen's, I think another important component is also to bucket what you're trying to accomplish. So when you're looking even, you know, organizational level or down to a manager level, there's a really important cadence of ensuring that if there are quick wins that you can really tick off in the beginning. If there's things that maybe are small, things you've been working on, but things that will show almost like a good faith effort to those who provided the feedback that I'm hearing you and I'm working to action. I think it's really important to be able to have some of those in the beginning while you're working on some of the longer term opportunities, maybe some of the longer term action planning. Because again, I think to Kristen's point, the importance of that more regular cadence of feedback is critical, but I think people also, it's natural, you want to see some progress. And some of the things are big and meaty and are going to take time. Other things, it may be a very small thing where a manager, instead of opening up a meeting, you know, and talking at you for 30 minutes, it's more of a discussion-based meeting. That's something that can be more of a quick win, and the team can see, you know what, wow, like they did hear my feedback on that. So now we're having a conversation versus someone talking at me for 30 minutes.
Really great. So connecting the whatever action you're taking to the business for the executive. So it's not just like, oh, this is employee feedback for the sake of employee feedback, but employee feedback for the sake of the business, and showing the impact of not dealing with it, the impact on the lack of trust, disengagement, and what will happen for the business if we don't take action. And then I really appreciate the quick wins, because quick wins are so energizing, not just for the employees who see them in action, but for the executives who have to keep taking the action. It's like, okay, we see some progress. There's signs of life. I can stay motivated on this so it's sometimes a very long road for hard change. Any of you have something you want to add to that before I throw another question from the participants? Yeah, LaToya.
I'll make a little snippet of that. I think just right above, I guess one action right before, you know, we start thinking through the action planning is, I think Kate, you alluded to a little bit, is I hear you and here are things that I've heard. I think that is like a really good framing for people to kind of, even though you don't have like, and we called it in our last company, actionable insights, you know, here are the actionable insights. And that's a good tester to kind of see, like, are we even going in the right direction before we start rattling off like a project plan or trying to chop down. And where I've seen that be very successful is that employees are like, okay, now I feel like I've been heard more than anything. However way we go about doing the information, we can always bring it back, or, you know, the action plan, we can always bring it back to the key headlines. And I think that has always helped.
Yes, and I think a few of you have also said you can't have a million of those key headlines, like really filtering it down to what are those few key headlines that you rally attention around, and are we moving in the right direction on those? So we have somebody asking in the Q&A, do you have any suggestions for communication on feedback taking into account differences like race, gender, and cultural background? And if you want to jump into a stab at that answer.
I'll start. I think it's a couple of things. So I think one important component, and again, I think I keep coming back to the same underlying key component of all of this is manager development. I think as a manager, it's so critically important that you take the time to get to know your team. I'm a big proponent in the work that we do of kind of that leader assimilation. So whether you're new to the organization, new to your role, and new to being a first-time manager, whatever that looks like, really taking the time to assimilate into your role and to get to know your team kind of with the support and partnership of your HR partner. I think having that enables you to know so many things about your team. One of them is the way in which they want to hear feedback, and maybe the way in which they want to communicate feedback. So obviously there's other things that will go with that recognition. How do they like to be recognized? But I think at the manager level, it's, I think, a responsibility of a manager to know your team, because not everyone is going to want to hear it in the same way. You may think that a great action planning discussion based on some feedback that was shared as a group is going to really help you to hear everyone's feedback in real time for a kind of a collective conversation. But for some folks, that's not going to be a comfortable place to speak up. And so they won't share, and then they will start to feel more disengaged because they aren't able to share their feedback. And maybe it's more of a one-on-one setting, or maybe it's more of a peer setting. I think it's a little bit of what we were talking about. Maybe that's a more comfortable setup. But I think it's so important as managers to spend the time, especially when you're new in your role or when you have new team members join, to get to know them and understand the way in which they like to give and receive feedback.
Absolutely. I would also just jump on that to say inclusive leadership conversations are so critical. And there's like the adage, one size doesn't fit all as a manager, and then you have to adjust to people. But if you're trying to look at feedback and say, okay, the feedback experience, this is the dominant experience, you're going to miss critical information about that. Might be the experience of maybe like one big dominant group, but not necessarily the experience of key constituents that you care about in the organization, and being taking the time to filter it down to understand those differences, and have leadership at the executive level looking at org-wide and at the manager level know that that experience of differences is a critical thing to manage, to have all people feel included and all voices heard. So we're running, sadly, out of time. So my question now for each one of you is, if you have just 1 minute to give one piece of actionable advice, one thing people can put into action, a tactical, practical thing, what would that one thing be as it relates to responding to employee feedback in a way that elevates commitment and moves the company forward? And Kristen, let's start with you.
Oh man, going first. I think what leaders can do and what HR partners can actually do is have a set of very clear expectation of the role of engagement in the manager's job description. Being very, I think, we talk about it a lot of, like, people take manager roles so that they can advance their careers and move up the ladder, but they don't necessarily maybe want to manage people. But if you walk into an organization and as part of your onboarding process or as part of your ongoing, learning and development and coaching, is that you own employee engagement, you own giving your employees freedom of opinions and listening to their opinions. You own having those conversations with them, of caring about them as people. Like, these are all the things, along with communication and strategy, that are going to help with engagement. And as a manager, that is your role to do that. So very clearly articulating that from, all the way from the top down, so that people have no kind of misconceptions about their role in this process, is one thing that you can start doing.
Fabulous. LaToya.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the one piece of tangible advice is, and I said it earlier, be very humanistic on what it is how you want people to feel when you're giving them feedback. And also speaking around even a diversity question that was asked earlier, that's, how people, want to feel. I think another thing is make sure that it is specific and about the actual job itself and not about the person. And I think that helps people separate the defensiveness. And also, when people are defensive, when you are giving them feedback, even though they need to hear it, respond to how they're behaving. Because if they're being defensive, that means that you need to shift gears, because they're not hearing it correctly, and they're not also in a safe enough place to be able to retain and also, create change or action against, that feedback. So really always coming back to the person, and also any relationship. And also, last thing is courage. You have to have courage. Sometimes I get executive buy-in, sometimes I don't, but it's really about courage. Any feedback that you give is going to be able to drive the business forward. You build your relationships on the outcomes you need for the business, not any personal work relationships that you have with people. People need to hear the truth.
Good. Katie?
I would say for me, the one piece of advice that I would give is the importance of creating mutual accountability. And what I mean by that is it's similar to engagement. Feedback is really the responsibility of both the person giving the feedback and the person receiving it. So as an associate, as a manager, as a leader, you have a responsibility to share feedback. Because if you don't share feedback, then you're doing your colleagues a disservice, you're doing your organization a disservice if you see areas that either are going really well or could be improved. On the other side of that, the accountability obviously is with the manager. But I think it's so easy sometimes for it to be seen as, you know, I'm going to give someone feedback and they're going to go fix it because I'm giving them the feedback. Whereas actually the best actions come out of a collaborative discussion where the person giving the feedback is also a part of the solution, right? So having that be, and that's where you start to get into continuous listening, you start to get into more of that culture change as an organization. So I think for me, it would just be that mutual accountability, helping everyone to see that they all have a role in moving things forward.
So good. Matt?
Yeah, I think the one piece or most important piece is, you know, thank your team for giving you feedback, right? Say thank you for doing it and demonstrate the appreciation and the gratitude by doing something with it. Even if it's really small, even if it's change the lunch menu, like do something to show that like you appreciate them taking the time to give you feedback and that the investment they made in doing it was worth it.
Yes, thank you, you panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your wisdom, dancing with the questions. We're so grateful to this community that is participating in this chat and sending questions in the registration and in the Q&A. Thank you so much for your rich questions and spending this time with us. And you're all amazing, and go make your version of this real in the world. And thank you.
Thank you.